Well, for more on this, Gabby is a White House reporter for Politico and joins me now. So, Gabby, while the president and these Democratic leaders are clashing, the White House sent a letter to all of Congress on border security today. What would be the purpose of sending this to like a wider group at this point?
Well, I think they want to make it very clear to Republicans who might be on the sidelines thinking that there's a chance that McConnell will turn and actually bring something to the floor in the Senate that would represent what Democrats want in this shutdown battle. The president will ultimately veto anything that comes to his desk that does not include that funding for a border wall. President Trump has stated this repeatedly over the last 2 weeks, but sending that letter, making it formal, laying that out to more moderate members of both the House and the Senate, I think really drives that message home and makes it more difficult for them to defend that and cozy up to the White House if they do turn around and back something that doesn't meet his requirements.
You know, it's important to note that the Senate, including some of the president's closest backers, actually passed a short-term spending bill without the border funding back in December. Why is it that McConnell won't budge now when it's something that could have made it through the Democratic-controlled House?
Well, that's something that Democrats have repeatedly asked. You know, why would the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, not bring forward a bill that has already essentially passed the Senate? And President Trump has said repeatedly that he will not support anything that is a clean continuing resolution, something that only includes funding for the current levels at the agencies that are currently without funding and a part of the shutdown. I think that the majority leader is feeling significant pressure at this point from the White House, from President Trump, from Vice President Mike Pence to stand strong on their opposition to a bill that does not include that wall funding figure. And look, the Senate is the only thing now that remains in Republican control. Republicans have lost the House, and so for any bill to get through Congress, it has to go through the Senate. And you know, reneging on this promise that President Trump made to his campaign base during the 2016 election would be potentially a devastating blow for him heading into 2020. And I think that's why we're seeing so much pressure put on Mitch McConnell to not bring to the floor any legislation that doesn't meet the requirements laid out by this White House.
You know, it's amazing. There are still so many Republicans who really have the back of President Trump, but Senator Cory Gardner says that they need to reopen the government, even without border wall funding. Why would some Republican senators break with the president on this?
Well, these are Republican senators who are facing difficult elections in 2020, who are in districts and from states that are certainly not as aligned with this White House as other states, and senators who come from, you know, Texas and some of these other states in the South. Susan Collins, the senator from Maine, is another person who came out today and said that she wasn't necessarily sure that there needs to be wall funding included in any type of spending package that goes before the Senate. So we are starting to hear some Republicans, as I mentioned, who are on the sidelines sort of watching how the optics of this shutdown are playing out, back away from the demand that President Trump has said that there needs to be this $5.6 billion funding for the wall in a spending package, and sort of say that they would be okay with, at the very least, a continuing resolution that funds the government at its current levels.
So at the same time, the president is actually questioning on Twitter, and I'm quoting here, how do you impeach a president who he says has done nothing wrong? Is that a concern for the White House with this new Congress?
I spoke with several people close to the White House this morning who are actually looking at all of this early chatter about impeachment sort of as a political gift to the president. They have long argued that these attempts to remove President Trump from office and all of this chatter among the incoming freshman class about impeachment actually benefits the president because it's not something necessarily that Americans want. There was a Gallup poll that came out earlier this year last year ahead of the midterm elections that showed that 59% of Americans oppose impeachment, but they do want Congress to increase the role that they play as a check on the executive branch. So I think the White House and the political advisors that are working on President Trump's re-election effort are looking at this carefully. Right now, they're not necessarily concerned, but of course, all of this is pending the results of the special counsel investigation and what we can learn from that about Trump's involvement in any potential collusion with Russian officials.
Gabby, before you go, we've heard that in the mix, the New York Times is reporting that the White House is actually eyeing former Democratic Senator Jim Webb as a potential replacement for Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. What would he bring to the table, and are you surprised that his name is sort of floating around?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily surprising to see a Democrat being considered for the defense secretary role. We've had Republicans like Leon Panetta serve under the Obama administration in that position, so it's not unusual. It is, however, kind of surprising that President Trump would look to another military figure. I've spoken to a few advisors who are sort of looking for somebody not aligned with General Mattis in the sense that they have defense experience or experience serving in combat and whatever, that actually they want somebody who has experience overseeing a huge bureaucracy or an organization of some kind, because that is what is needed right now at the Pentagon. And I think that's playing a crucial role in this search for the next defense secretary. It's nowhere near an end at this point. I think the president right now is content with Shanahan in there, and they're looking at all different types of candidates with all different types of backgrounds.
Gabby, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.